Then go live. Oh my God, you're live. Let's see. I am refreshing on the YouTube. If my phone would like me to. Oh my gosh. I think it says we're live. We're live. So I think so.
Who knows? It feels very alive.
Let me see. Let me see if I can write a message. Okay, I'm gonna give you a few seconds. I see myself and I see us. Oh my God, we're live. Okay, hi.
We're really here. We're really here.
We're really here. It's happening. Hello. Oh my gosh. Hi, Isabella.
Hi, Isa.
Yay.
Isa, I hope you don't mind, Isa, but you are. She is writing multiple POVs as we speak.
Oh, wow.
So Isa is a wonderful, wonderful writer. She is una hermana. So big ups to Isa. Yeah, do you want to wait a few minutes and sort of see, like, as people come on?
Let's give it a minute. What time is it now? It is.
Amparo is in the house.
Oh, hi.
Woo! Amparo. Amparo, is that your icon? Oh, you have bangs. I love it.
Right.
Okay.
Annika is here.
Annika. Hi, Annika.
Wonderful.
This is really, we only do this so we can hang out with y'all. We have nothing to say. We just want to hang out all day long. So
welcome to Las Musas party.
That's right.
It was all a ruse. There's no chatting.
Come in. There are some snacks in the back. I wish.
I have my little granola.
I got nothing, man. See, Mia is the snack maker. And Jenny is a pupusa queen. I got nothing. No snacks at all. Zero. Like, mad about it. It's okay. It's okay. All right. So I am happy to kick things off with some introductions. My name is Alexandra Villasante. I am the author of The Grief Keeper, and I am a proud member of Las Musas. And I am here moderating today with these two lovely, lovely humans, Mia García, Jenny Torres Sanchez. And let me do a little bit of an intro for both of you. I'm going to read it because I don't want to mess up. I sound like Noni now, don't I? Noni's like, I got to read it. I don't want to mess up. Okay. Okay, here we go. I'll do my very posh accent. Mia García was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. She moved to New York, where she studied creative writing at the New School, worked in publishing, and lived under a pile of to-be-read books. Aren't we all, sister? She is the author of Even If the Sky Falls and The Resolutions from Catherine Teagan Books, an imprint of HarperCollins. Hey, yeah. And Jenny Torres Sanchez is a full-time writer and former English teacher. She was born in Brooklyn, New York, but has lived on the border of two worlds her whole life. She is the author of 5 novels for young adults, as well as contributor to anthologies for young adults. Her most recent novel, We Are Not From Here, released just a few weeks ago, it is about the plight of 3 teenagers from Guatemala trying to get to the United States aboard the dangerous train known as La Bestia. Jenny currently lives in Orlando, Florida with her husband and children, all of whom are adorable, I am sure. Everyone is adorable. Cute. So one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, I think, and we had talked about this, it's been sort of on our mind, is we don't often get to talk about craft. Like, we talk about a lot of things. We talk about a lot of, like, social issues and what it means to be Latinx and all these sort of like intersectionalities, which is great and happy to talk about. But, how often do we just sit and talk about how do you make words go?
Yeah.
Which is what I want to know. How do you make it even more complicated when how you make words go when it is multiple point of views? This is a hard nut to crack. And I think with both of you writing, not only like dual point of view is one thing, multiple point of view is that plus extra layers. So I think that so many people have come out to me when I'm doing workshops and just, in public, like, it seems so difficult to achieve, to do really well. Lots of people do it, but to do it really well. So that's why we're here. But before we get to that, can you both tell us a little bit about the stories that we're talking about with the multiple POVs? Today, for Mia, it is the resolutions. And for Jenny, it is We Are Not From Here. So can you set us up a little bit about the story and the characters?
Jenny, you should go first because
Okay. Thank
Because
you.
why?
We Are Not From Here just came out, and I want everybody to buy it and read it.
If you're not buying these books,
you.
what are you doing? Like, really? Why are you still sitting here? Or no, sit here, but like go open up another window, go to your independent bookstore and buy both these books. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mia. And okay, so We Are Not From Here is about 3 teenagers from Guatemala who are traveling on La Bestia to try to seek refuge in the United States. They've found themselves in very dangerous situations in their hometown, and they really feel like it's their only way to survive. So they first have to make it through their country from Guatemala to Mexico. And then in Mexico is where La Bestia actually starts. And it's actually a series of trains. It's not one. So they have to ride all these trains trying to just get to the border. So that's what the book's about. A lot before the actual journey, then the journey, and then their different fates. So
wonderful.
Mia.
And it's beautiful and wonderful, and you need to buy it.
Hi.
Or get it from your local library. We're going to be saying that the entire hour. So the resolutions is, I call the resolutions the Latinx Breakfast Club because it's essentially, thank you. All of my books are in storage, so all I got is this in the background.
It's so cute.
So it's a Latinx Breakfast Club. It is 4 friends who have been friends most of their lives or for many years, depending on the friend. And they're going into their senior year. And the mother of the group, Jess, is worried that because they're going off to college and going into different futures, it's going to rip them apart as friends. So they had a previous. They used to do New Year's resolutions for each other back when they were kids. So she decides to reinstate that for their junior to senior year. So essentially they have to write resolutions for each other and they have to complete them by the end of the year. So this sets off a whole slew of shenanigans and heartbreak and new loves and stress and all those wonderful things that make a book come together. But it's really a story about friendship and about how strong it is and family and just the different ways one can be Latinx and so on.
And it's so good. I love it. Fantastic.
So funny. Like I was just rereading parts of it last night. I'm like, this is funny. Like this is like warm and funny and heartbreaking and all the things. Just So I know that I mentioned, Jenny, that you were writing multiple point of views. We Are Not From Here is dual point of view, but I always think it's 3 because Chico's personality is so well defined and marked, and like I feel like I know him so well, even though he doesn't get those, those chapters to himself. So I just wanted to say that first of all, but also how do you approach this when you want to tell intersecting arcs of stories? You know, you have either 4 people or 3 people where 2 will speak. How do you start? Like, what's the first thing you do?
Like when I'm thinking of writing more than one?
Yeah. Well, yeah. What's the first? Well, how about we've started even earlier? What is a reason to do more than one point of view rather than one point of view?
You know, for me, it really is like the characters just show up, you know? And so I know that sounds like, oh, well, you know, like, how am I supposed to know? But for me, like, Pulga showed up and Pequeña showed up and Chico showed up. And I was like, okay, this story has to be told from these different points of view. And with this one in particular, because it was going to be this long journey, you know, and I knew that, like, bringing the reader through with just one voice on this very long journey might get kind of monotonous, that I was like, well, I really want them to hear from these other characters or from this other character, and be with these other characters. So I think this book kind of naturally lends itself to more than one point of view, because each character can bring something fresh to it. Like, here's a story about this journey, and it's a story about migrants, and I can show how the journey can be the exact same journey for these two different characters, but it can be so different and so altering for them in different ways. And, kind of approaching the story in that way, being able to show show how the same thing can affect people differently, I thought would make this story just more well-rounded.
Right.
Yeah.
Mia, what about you? What made you think that those many voices are approaching it in that way?
For me, it came a lot from what kind of story I wanted to tell. And I chose the Latinx Breakfast Club specifically because I did want to hark back to those movies that I had watched growing up, where it was just a group of friends having hijinks and surviving at the end, because they were almost always white, and bring that into the Latinx community and bring it into for Boricua teens. And there was always in those stories multiple points of view. In the friend group. And for me, it was actually, when I was putting it together, I started with, I had the idea started with 4 people. And then at some point I was like, do I need 4 people? Because I was not connecting to one of the characters as I had initially drawn them. So I had to have those conversations as to why this person belongs here. What are they bringing to the story, and why am I not connecting, even though I feel that this needs to be a multiple point of view story. And it was actually Nora, the character of Nora. Initially, in the first iteration of Nora, I did not like her.
Oh, wow.
But it came through a conversation with my editor where she was just like, I really feel like it's a dynamic of 4 people. And I was like, well, I feel like you're wrong. And I feel like I'm going to kill her off. And that this will be it's fine. It's like 3 people is fine. And it was because my editor was just like, no, I think you need to revisit who this character is and what they're bringing to the dynamic of the story and why their point of view is so important to tell within the story. And then that's when I literally scraped Nora away and then wrote her again from the beginning as a different person and who their dynamic within the group was going to be.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's so interesting because all of your characters are strong, but Nora is the one that kind of resonated with me the most. So I think it's so interesting that she almost didn't make the cut, kind of thing.
Well, we wouldn't say the old Nora didn't make the cut, but the new Nora.
So that's another thing. There's the deciding that this story needs to be told through multiple point of views, because not every story does need that, and it can be daunting to approach it with multiple point of views. But then, so Mia, when you went back and you were like, I'm not connecting with Nora, I need my editor wants me to relook at this, how did you scrape her back? What techniques did you use to rethink about Nora?
I'm trying. It was the book came out in 2018, so I was like thinking back to 2 years before that. Why did I decide?
I remember yesterday, so go ahead, take your time.
I essentially rebuilt her with the I thought of the group as a dynamic, and I thought of what is missing in this dynamic, and what can Nora bring, what is her relationship to everybody else, to Ryan, to Jess, to Lee, and then I started thinking Nora as a baker, and started thinking of how does that affect her point of view, and what does that bring, and then her relationship with her mother came about, and it's just sort of slowly forming the pieces of this bigger puzzle, with always the 4 of them as a friendship dynamic at the center.
Wow, that's so smart, and I'm so glad that she stayed and got even stronger and was Nora that we love now. So Jenny, when you have a similar thing with Pulga, Pequeña, and Chico, that they are friends, they know each other, they're in the same town. Some of their relations are either related or close to each other's families. What was the genesis of how you thought they would each interact? Because I think that's one of the things when you were talking about how this same journey can be so different depending on the people who the people are taking that journey. I thought of, sometimes in the flashbacks when you're talking about what life was like before they fled, they're talking about some of the same stores, some of the same people, but from different perspectives. So how did you approach that they would have interconnecting stories?
I really before.
Yeah,
I knew that they were going to be close because they were going to take this trip together, right? And I really wanted them to feel like they were family. So, but I didn't want them to be siblings because then too many factors would be the same, they would have the same backstory with their parents. They would, kind of have the same memories and all of that stuff. So I didn't want them to be siblings, but I wanted them to love each other like their siblings. I just started thinking of how you have found family, and so Chico and Pulga are very, very, very much like brothers, like that close to one another. And then we kind of get Chico's backstory. We understand why he ended up living with Pulga, So it was just kind of really trying to think about how can I make them family without technically making them family. And that will give me a lot more to work with in terms of what they've been through and what kind of pushes them each into their situation that ultimately sends them running.
Yeah.
Can I ask, why is it because Pulga and Chico are so close? Why Chico doesn't have a POV?
Yeah, that's part of it, definitely, because they are super close and because the same kind of catalyst, the same situation sends both of them running. So initially Chico did have some narratives in there, and then it was just kind of there wasn't enough distinction, there wasn't enough difference between him and Pulga, so that then he ended up not having his own story told throughout.
That is so interesting that you actually had some initial POV from Chico, because Chico is such a lovely character that you just ache for so much. But I think you do a beautiful job of really giving him a voice without actually a point of view. So both of you in both of these books are basically giving a masterclass in how to have the voice of the book, the voice of the individual POVs, and how to keep them not only separate, but making them make character sense. Really, the choices they make, the words that they use, even the varying sentence lengths within their POV is very much that character. So can you talk a little bit about the craft of it? What do you have character sketches for each one and say these are the kinds of words that, for example, Ryan might use and might not use? How far do you go when it comes to the technique of perfecting voice?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you wanted to go first.
Yeah.
So I don't specifically look at certain language that one would use or the other would use, but I do. Each of the characters has a specific trait or worldview, or even if it's just something they're really passionate about or love, that settles me in the character before I start. And this is sometimes maybe I made it a little bit I cheated a little bit. Ryan is a painter, so whenever I would go into Ryan's brain, I would look at paint palettes, I would look at painters that he might love, I would look at colors of the acrylics that he might be using, of the oils, of techniques. I would start describing a scene as he would start painting it in his head. So that's usually how I got into his brain through the love of paint. For Nora, it was baking. Right. So she's always covered in sugar, and she's always talking about the things that would just come to her mind and the way that she would be creative. So that's how I got into her mind. And for Jess, sadly, it was her anxiety and the way that she overthought things at times and the repetitive nature of her brain and her stress. So those were my just little like keys and doorways into how I got into each character.
Yeah, I think that's exactly like getting in their heads is exactly like the right term. You know, like you really need to think and view the world the way that your character would, you know. So for me, it was just trying to get to know them, to know them personally. And for me, when I write, I use music a lot. So I make, you know, like playlists, and the whole playlist will kind of have like the overall feel and tone and mood of the book. But then, you know, there are definitely some songs in there that are very, very character specific. So there'll be one for Pulga, there was one for Pequeña, there was one for Chico. It's very much the song that kind of reveals their heart to me the most. And when I'd start writing a scene, and I knew that I was going to start writing from Pulga's point of view, I'd listen to that song to just kind of get me in the right frame of mind. And then there was, you know, I kind of think of it as taking residence. Like when we start writing a book and these characters kind of show up and we know we're going to be spending all this time with them, it's not just the time that we're in front of our computers typing away, right? Like they are with us 24/7 the entire time that we're writing. So I really like to just be very aware that they're always with me. And when I'm going through my like day-to-day life and I see something, I try to figure out like, how would Pulga see this? Like, what would he think about this? And how would this affect him? Like if, you know, I'm driving and I see a mother and a little boy crossing the street or something, like that hits me a certain way, but how would it hit Pulga? And what memories would it jog for him? Or, you know, same thing with Pequeña, same thing with Chico, you know, how would they view the world? And I think a lot of times when I am constantly aware of viewing things through their eyes or getting in their heads, that's what like helps me in how I'm going to approach a scene, or sometimes it inspires a scene. So it's really that kind of getting in their mindset and understanding, you know, how they would feel about certain things, even if it's not in the book yet, you know, it just kind of reveals them to me more.
Or even if it never makes it into the book, it's really just about building that character sort of like layer by layer. One of the things that we had talked about when we had our pre-meeting, we just, any excuse to talk is really what's up. But I gave a presentation at Highlights a while back about using visual art techniques in writing. And both of you guys, because I knew that you had been used different ways, methods to get to character. And if I can, I just want to share some of the work that the visual art or the visual representations that you both have used with your characters. If I can, give me 1 second. I hope I don't fail. Okay, let's see.
While Alex is doing that, I want to let people know that they can ask questions in the Q&A box, and we will see them pop up so that we can address them.
Yes. Hey, okay.
Here we go.
Is it the working?
Yes.
Hey, all right. So this is really what you were talking about, Mia, and I just picked a few of them. So this is from your Pinterest page, which I also made a Pinterest for the Grief Keeper. And it's something that publishers and like marketing departments are asking for books, because they want to, right at the beginning, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Mia, but at the beginning, before even you get a cover, like, what images have you collected about your own books and characters? So I feel like your Pinterest page is so evocative, and you immediately see like the food, Nora, and you see the paint, Ryan, like you see all these things, and then I start like seeing, like looking at the sky and constellations, and like I'm like, oh my God, it's all there. Like once you know, you're like, It's incredible. And it's lovely to have images when, I think, when you're working, especially if you get stuck. So how do you think you use some of this work that you do in character building when you're actually writing? Wait, hold on. Don't answer the question. I know I'm very professional. Let me first get, I know I'm really good at this. Let me get, okay, let me get to Jenny's slide. Hey, all right. So Jenny also did this, I love this so much because it's so like, it makes perfect sense to me. There is a heart for Pulga, there's a heart for Chico, and a heart for Pequeña. And like, look at Pulga's heart, it's anatomical. Like, Pulga is somebody who really tries so hard to just be like, disconnected from feeling so he can survive, whereas Chico's heart is bleeding, like he's so all feeling, and then Pequeña is on fire. Like it's like I saw this and I was like, yep, that's it, I understand, it's perfect. So I'm gonna stop sharing now that everybody's seen those, if I can, and then get back to the question. It all worked beautifully, yay. Okay. But so my question was, like, when you're writing, like, how do you go back to your playlist, to your images, and like help you get back on track? You know, because I've been in that place where I'm writing a character, and I'm not even talking about multiple point of views, just writing a character, and I go back and I'm like, they wouldn't say that, they wouldn't do that. You know, so how do you use the character building techniques that you've used to get you back on track? And either one of you wants to answer first.
I use it as an anchor, you know, like for me, I knew that each one of my characters was very sensitive. Like that is just part of who they are, each of them. And I think it was essential for each of them to be sensitive, right, in this story, and for me not to take that away from them. But then the challenge was like, how am I going to portray three very sensitive characters and have them seem distinct, you know, and have them have these different voices? So then it was just kind of like, you know, how does that sensitivity affect them? And when I thought about that, that's really when like the drawing or sketching or whatever, you know, the art kind of comes into place, and then it helps ground me in who they are. So when I would kind of veer off course, it was kind of like, oh, it's right here. It's so simple, you know, like Chico is a bleeding heart. He is, you know, like all innocence. He is all just goodness. And then that would anchor me to help me, you know, just kind of stay on course when I was writing about Chico, or when I was revealing, you know, what he'd been through. And then with Pulga, it was like, okay, you have to remember he's very, you know, he's not a romantic. He doesn't want to appear like he is, you know? So his heart is anatomically correct, and he just is very logical, and he wants to think very logically. And Pequeña, you know, she's on fire. She's blazing, you know, and it's for different reasons. So the art for me just very much helps ground me and helps remind me, like in a very simple kind of way, this is what the character's about. Now, you know, write it through that lens.
Right.
Yeah.
And Mia, you too, with the same imagery, like, do you go back to it? Did you go back to your Pinterest board while you were writing?
I did not go back to my Pinterest board. Was actually super useful because I sent it to my editor along with photos for the cover when we were talking about the cover. But I tend to scribble in notebooks and cut out images and paste them along the side and stuff like that as I do writing. Yeah, I usually, whenever I need to like focus myself into the character, I think a lot about, again, I look at that key that I made for each character, like baking or film or stuff like that. And I research images and I research terminology and I research artists. Or for Nora, I was like baking. I was like, what would she be thinking about at this time and stuff like that. But the thing that anchors me the most is was their resolution in specific, because the resolution was essentially the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Was what is that's driving them forward, or what is keeping them in place. And I usually went back to that singular thing as to place me in the character in the moment.
That was such a beautiful way of doing it, because from the very beginning, the resolution is revelatory about their character and continues to reveal their character deeper and deeper as they come up against it.
Mm-hmm.
As time goes by, they keep coming up. It's so good. So getting down to, we talked about like big ideas and like things to help us sort of differentiate different voices and imagery and music, all fantastic ideas. But like, and I've had this. This is me. I am talking about myself. Where you are, I know what to do. I know to keep them different. I know to, keep these images in my mind. But then while I'm writing, I can very easily veer off into people sounding samey. And, that's a function of like partially my own personality coming out a little bit. So what are some, like, when do you do most of your like voice work, when you're drafting or when you're revising?
For me, it's definitely, I think it's both. Like I have the same issue that you do, where they'll start sounding similar, or they'll start, kind of describing something in a similar way. And I just kind of allow it to be sometimes, like, it's just kind of like, okay, it's fine. We can go back and change this. So I think you have to be a little bit forgiving of yourself, because so much of who the characters are also reveal themselves as you're writing. And what may be hard, it might be hard to like distinguish them at the beginning. Once you're kind of deep into the manuscript, they become more distinct to you. And I think then you can go back to some of the stuff you wrote earlier and be like, oh, like they wouldn't describe it this way, or they wouldn't necessarily think this way. And I think that helps a lot too. Like getting the story out and not thinking that the voices are going to be so separate or so different from the get-go, and allowing the stories to kind of tell themselves, and then going back and working on making them different a little bit more.
Is that what you did, Mia?
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, just like, allow yourself to mess it up as often as you need it to be. My worry when I was writing the 4 characters is that for some reason I had it in my head that they could not experience the same thing throughout the novel, which is ridiculous.
You mean at all? Like they're emotionally either, or?
I just kept going because a lot of Jess's plotline was around anxiety and around stress. But Lee has a lot of that too, because she's coming from her issues with her mom passing away from a genetic disease. And I was just like, no, they can't have the same. They can't have stress. They both can't have that. I was like, what are you talking about? And I think it stemmed from the worry of blending characters in too much. But I think if you're doing the work to really see A, who this person is, and B, why they're in this story, that eventually you're going to get those distinct voices that you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true, because, when I was writing both Pulga and Pequeña, I really kind of was wondering, okay, they're going through the same experience and they're both going, like, what is that character arc going to look like? It's going to look the same for both of them, and that was something that I constantly struggled with as I was writing. And then at some point I realized, wait a minute, one of them is going to have kind of like hope rising in them more as they move forward, as the journey takes place. There's more hope for one of them. And in the other one, we're going to see how their hope is falling and how the journey is really taking a beating on them. But I didn't realize that until, a lot of the story was written, and then it was going back and being like, okay, I have to, really show how one of them is losing hope and how the other one is believing that things are going to get better. So
when you do this, what, like, like, what's the practical, because that's one of the things that again, this is me, I'm struggling with, like, how are these two character arcs intersecting? And in Purga and Pequeña's case, and in the resolutions, they are naturally brought together. There are reasons for them to interact in a lot of different ways, or in one journey. But when you don't necessarily have them, do you start writing a character arc for each one, even if they're overlapping? Like, I'm just getting real granular on, like, how do you do the thing? Can you tell that it's really just for my benefit? Because I started doing like a beat sheet for each character, and there were a lot of it would be intersecting, but there were also, like, what happens when they're away from each other and they don't intersect? So what do you do practically?
Jenny, do you want to go? And then I'll go.
I do a lot of writing that ends up being thrown out. Like I do a lot of writing that I mess up, that I get it wrong, that feels forced. And, and then I go and I sit somewhere and I do a lot of thinking. And I know that sounds really, kind of like simplistic or whatever, but that's what happens for me. I end up writing it where it is kind of like, okay, they both sound the same, they both are feeling the same thing because they're both, getting closer to the United States border. And it's kind of like, no, this can't be affecting them in exactly the same way, because it would make for a boring story. And, one of the things I really wanted to show was that the same thing can affect people differently. And then, as I started kind of like trying not to force things and listening more to my character and reminding myself that, Purga is the one that is more rigid and Pequeña is the one that's, going back to like the art and stuff like that. I realized, that they were different in that, one was believed more and one was shutting down more.
And one of the things that you did is at a moment when they are having a lot of the same or similar feelings, and I'm not going to give anything away, they have conflict. They have moments where they disagree with each other, and they are at like this. They're going through the same experience, and they are experiencing a lot of the same emotions, obviously, because they're getting closer to the border. A lot of things are at stake. A lot of things are terrible. But I think one of the things, if I could say that you did that to make their voices so different, is how they approach this conflict and how they, not fight with each other, but in a way they have, like a real conflict, a moment where they really are not of the same mind. And that's very revealing.
Right. And it's very much like what would happen if you're with somebody 24/7 under, like stress and in a really difficult position. You start to like snap at each other, and you start to like, parts of you might start resenting, how somebody dealt with something, or how it affected somebody else. So I just kind of like try to use that to the benefit of showing how they were different and how they were dealing with the whole journey.
Yeah, I think conflict, and this is sort of a little bit in resolutions as well, conflict between friends who are struggling in similar ways can reveal more about themselves, much more than when they're agreeing.
Yeah.
One of the times that I feel like I have the most trouble distinguishing voice is in dialogue. So maybe it's because I'm writing it as if I'm talking to myself, and I'm just like, well, you didn't say that. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. And it's very boring and terrible, and it never makes it into a book. But what are the things that you bring to a dialogue when two people are sort of like, again, having high emotions, and you have to, like, I think about what Linda Sue Park said about voice being really about word choice and sentence structure. And when I think about writing, even if it's not multiple point of view, but just different characters in dialogue, I do choose different words for them. And I'm not as rigid as keeping a list of words that they don't use or do use, but I think you could do that if it helped you because I think that there's, I've come against, that's not a word that character would use, but it is a word that this character would use. So when you're writing dialogue and you're trying to make it sound very naturalistic, how do you account for voice? Mia goes first.
Oh gosh. I feel like I don't have a necessary answer. I hear their voices in my head. A lot of my favorite part about writing in the resolutions was I did a text thread between all 4 of them, and just them ripping,
so good.
like ripping each other apart, and just like, the way you just text threads with your friends and stuff like that.
Highlighted one. Go ahead.
And it's just, I know it's not the best answer, but just hearing them in my head, because there's also when you're putting together a group of friends that have been together for so long, they do tend to use the same language, and they do tend to pick up mannerisms from the other person. And I think it's just how you focus the lens on the specific character at the time that will set them apart.
I hadn't planned on this because, like I said, I'm super professional, but I had just reread this part last night. Do you mind, Mia, if I read? Sure. This is a group text interaction. I'll just read a little bit. And it's after a party. So it's after a party that they've all been to. Lee, what's his name again? Ryan. Blake. Nora. Blake of the nice ass. Ryan, how do you know he has a nice ass? Nora, Beth and I can spot a nice ass from miles away. Lee, and he knew you before BJ? Ryan, BJ? Lee, before Jason? Jess, we're not using that. So you can tell so much about their relationship and things that they've experienced together before without having to explain any of it. That's what's so beautiful about the dialogue. Like, it's very clear. Like, you can almost be like, I know what you're thinking, And I think that's, so I know you made it sound like it's so easy. I just hear their voices in my head. I don't know, but you do it beautifully. I'm still like, I know, and I think a lot of this, and this is something we didn't talk about before, but a lot of the apprehension of writing dual or multiple point of view is that you're not going to know how to do it. You're going to get it wrong. And maybe the story doesn't even merit it. Like, the 3 big things. Like, you don't know how to start. You don't know if you're going to do it right. And is this story supposed to be told that way? So when you're approaching a new story or a story that you're working on now-ish or soonish, how would you approach those questions? If that makes sense. Like, how would you ask yourself, like, is this idea a multiple POV idea? Like, how do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you do have to take a moment and think, like, will adding another character reveal more about this story, or, enhance this story in any way? And if it's going to enhance the story, if it's going to tell, a bigger story, then I think, yes, include multiple points of view, but it has to serve a purpose. It has to be, there has to be a reason for it. But if it's, just because you want to have a couple of people in there, then it can kind of become gimmicky, and then it can be harder to write because you're kind of telling the same story and just kind of having more people tell it.
You're also sort of like diluting the point of your story.
Yes, I think that's exactly what happens. Yeah. If a story doesn't necessarily need more than one character, it dilutes it. And if the story, needs more, it really does enhance it.
And I was thinking, I texted y'all yesterday because this all got me thinking about, because in both of our stories, our characters intersect and they do form a larger point to the novel, which is all together. But a lot of multiple POV stories do not have intersecting characters. If you think about most of epic fantasies and historical, intersectional, family generational novels,
but do you mean that they will intersect at one point at the end, or maybe not at all?
Or both.
Yeah. Okay.
Both. So it really comes, for example, like epic fantasies, like it's been a while since I've read Game of Thrones or something, but half of those characters never meet. They're all on their own journeys and they're all telling those stories, but they're all of them together are telling one novel, right? Regardless of whether or not they are meeting or not. So in a way, depending on if they're intersecting or not, you're kind of playing a long game as to how all of this is going to come together. And you have to think about where do you want to be at the end, and whose point of view and whose story and whose voices are putting all of that together, if at all.
Yeah, you're making me doubt everything. Okay, cool.
No. So now on to Alex's novel.
Nope. That's a big nope. But I think like I think that it's the kind of thing that a lot of people want to try, and one, to challenge yourself to see if you can do it. Like there's that aspect as well. And I think everyone should try. But to your point, ultimately, even if you start things off and do like some chapters and try things out, that's great. You should always do that. But ultimately it has to serve the story that you want to tell, and the larger story, and what you want to express with the novel entirely. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But for me, the thing that I keep, like, I think me being me, I'm like, just try. Do it. Try it. You'll know if it doesn't work out. You won't know until you try. So you should just like put yourself out there and be like, I'm gonna write these 3 characters or however many characters, because I feel like each of them has a very specific point of view to bring, and something that's gonna bring the reader an understanding that they could not reach on with this one character. So I feel like that's what I get when I read your books. So much, like it's a deepening of understanding, and I feel like that's that. If you're on the fence about whether you should do it, you have an idea that you think could work, and you're not sure, and you're hesitant, just try it, just do it, and maybe use some of the ideas that you guys had about imagery, about music, about like vocabulary. Just put it out there and see what shakes out.
Yeah, and I think you really can't tell sometimes until you try it. It's like first person and third person, right? Sometimes you start writing in first person, and then you're like, oh no, would this be better if it's third person, because I can do all these other things if I do that. And then the story starts to tell you what it needs to be, and I think that happens when you're writing multiple points of view. Is you can try writing it just from this perspective, and then you're like, well, maybe, if I add more people, it'll enhance it. Maybe I added too many people, so now I got to cut one off, And I think that just if you try, that's when you're really going to figure it out.
So I have a few questions here if we wanted to start. I accidentally showed one earlier, which was just someone randomly trolling. So sorry about that.
Good job.
Okay. Do we see?
Yes. Do.
Awesome.
Oh, this is a good question. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, please.
Because maybe, I don't know. When did you make these character imagery boards? Maybe while developing your outline, or after writing a few chapters, or during another step in the... That's a really good question.
I do it a little bit all over the place. So for not really so much beforehand, because beforehand it's just, the characters, me trying to figure out, okay, who is this, And then when I start writing the initial scene or spark that kind of, set the whole thing in motion, and start thinking a little deeper about the character, that's when I start kind of like, I call it like collecting things, because I also will find like little trinkets or stickers or magnets, that kind of, I don't know, seem very much like my character. And so that's when I start thinking more about the character, and that's when I start, doing artwork, and that's when I start like looking at poems that seem very much like this character or that character. And then when I hit kind of like blocks and I'm not sure who my character is anymore. I lose sight of them a little bit. I'll do some of that kind of stuff to try to anchor me again.
Yeah.
A lot hard same on all of that. A little bit here and there, and a lot of it during restructuring or editing of the novel, where I'm trying to just flesh things out. I tend to flesh as I go along. So having imagery to go along with it is super helpful. I can't write to music, so I usually write to the sound of thunder or like the hurricane sounds. I don't know why, but that's all I can do. For my current work in progress, I've started like collecting photos from the beginning because it's very mood and thematic heavy. So I found it super helpful for that story in particular because it's sort of consistently setting a scene with each chapter.
And I think Alyssa, you can actually do this, as you've said, at all those times because you're not wedded to it. It's not like if you start in the beginning with this character sketch that you have to stick with it. Characters evolve as you're writing them and new information reveals itself to you. So you should absolutely, if you feel comfortable, if you need the spark to get you going, you want to start some imagery before you even write, I think that's fine as long as you don't feel like you have to get stuck to it.
Okay, here we go.
So should the characters get equal time? That is such a good question. Mia, do you want to start?
Oh my gosh. So four characters is a lot. So that means a lot of time is shared between them. And I think as I was writing, I was trying to pay attention to who needed the emotional beat at the time in order to segue to the next chapter and to have an overall tone for the novel, right? Because even though each character has their own POV and their own storyline and structure, at the end of the day, it all has to come together in one book. So the emotional, I always say it's kind of like a song, like a symphony, like they're all playing their own instruments, they're all going their way, but at the end, everything has to come together. Or as Lori said, Lori House Anderson told us, it's sort of like a waltz and partners come in and out all the time from the waltz. So you sort of have to pay attention to where they are at the time and where they are in the dance. By
the way, she used a salt and pepper shaker and a bottle of Tabasco to make this.
Just
It
imagine you dancing.
It blew my mind. So yes.
So I think it just should feel like because they're in your novel, and the level of importance that they have, they should feel like that they have their emotional arc that is due to them. Yeah, I think you kind of have to like fail a little bit and figure it out and see who's missing what as you're looking at the story as a whole. Right.
Do either of you ever do the, I think it's called the micro novel. I can't remember what it's called, and I cannot also remember who did it, but it's sort of like Chris Tebbets was, but Chris Tebbets was talking about it at a workshop where you print out the whole novel and you sort of highlight, you look like by shrunken novel, maybe. Okay. So you shrink down the novel and you highlight instances, for example, of like, if you're doing different point of views, like when somebody is speaking and when someone, or when somebody is acting and when someone is being acted upon. And by highlighting those sections, you can sort of see at a glance if you're doing enough for that person. So have you tried anything like that?
I haven't, because I get lost in too much stuff like that. You know, like I'm the kind of person, I print out the whole novel and after like 15 or 20 pages, I'm back on the computer because it becomes like overwhelming, you know. I see people who have like all these Post-it notes and, you know, when I try to do it, it like frazzles me. So not so much, but, you know.
That sounds intense.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a great idea, but I've never done it.
The equal airtime, I think it could go either way, because I've read some books where, you know, it's very much equal airtime, and then others where there's definitely one voice that is telling more of the story, and that other voice is acting kind of almost like a support role, you know. So I think it can be either or. I don't think if you do one, you know, or I don't think one's wrong. With We Are Not From Here, I very much gave them equal airtime because it helped me to push the story forward.
Yeah.
You know, like if I stayed in one character's head too long, then we were kind of like seeing the same thing over and over again. And I kind of wanted to keep the story, you know, pushing forward. So I would switch back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to kind of quicken the pace of a story that, you know, you're telling on a train. And that could get very stale very quickly. So I needed that kind of dynamic of going back and forth, and they ended up having equal airtime because of that.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it specifically to the resolutions, it was getting to the end and then reading everything again and realizing that there were gaps. There were gaps in emotional transformation. There were gaps with just how the character was getting from A to B, and how I filled those gaps, and how those gaps interacted with the other characters is how I figured it. Like, I didn't count to make sure that everybody got 5 chapters each and such like that. It was more about how the emotional beats were working within the novel altogether and within each character.
And that's maybe something that's obvious, but it just occurred to me what you're saying is that if the character is a POV character, they have to have that emotional arc. They have to grow and change and be in a different place at the end, because otherwise, why are we letting them have that point of view? Why are we in their heads if we're not seeing them grow, evolve, and all that kind of stuff?
Or why is their point of view important for the story?
Right, exactly. Exactly. That's a better way of saying what I want to say. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, we have one more.
Okay, Ryan, how do you determine if a character should get their own point of view? And are there any particular voice challenges you faced, and how did you solve them? These are all excellent questions. I think we talked about this a little bit, Jenny, with Chico, about why he didn't ultimately get his own point of view.
Yeah, it was just, you know, like he wasn't necessarily telling me anything that Pulga couldn't already tell me. So that's kind of, you know, why both my editor and I decided, you know, like maybe we don't need his voice. And if his arc is going to be so similar to Pulga's, then maybe, you know, because Pulga is the older one, the more dominant one, the one whose voice comes across stronger, maybe we just need his voice, but we can tell a lot about Chico through Pulga. So, you know, that's why we do learn a lot about him, and he does feel like, you know, this other character who has this whole voice in there. And then the challenges was kind of that when I talked to you guys about the sensitivity, like how am I going to make these voices different if they're all, you know, they're all going through the same thing and they all have very similar hearts. It was just kind of realizing, but how does it affect them all differently? So I think if you start looking at, you know, how something is going to hit each one of your characters differently, then that helps with the voice a little bit.
Yeah. Were there any voice challenges, kind of going to Ryan's question, that you remember being particularly difficult, where you're like, you had to really sit and go, okay, wait, let me work this out?
Well, it actually came to my worry that Jess and Lee had the same amount of same stresses in a way, or same anxieties, or anxieties, period. I worried that I was not good enough to differentiate how they were different. So a lot of it came from just my own worries that I was not good enough quite yet to make 2 distinct characters that were going through anxiety attacks, going through stress, going through all that stuff. But I think it's just again, a point of really digging into your character and really digging into where they are at the beginning and where they need to be at the end, and what are the points that need to get them there, based on this character that you've created. And I think, as to our conversation where I almost killed off Nora, is what are they bringing to the story? What dynamic are they adding? What importance do they play? And are they, as Jenny says, are they enhancing or are they detracting?
Yep.
Because I don't know about y'all, but I don't have time to read through something that is just slogging through and it doesn't it's not working. And I feel like you kind of get as you're writing in and you're rewriting and you're getting a sense of what your novel is, you're going to get a sense of who needs to be there and who is a story told through somebody else's point of view. That is actually going to be a much better point of view for your story.
Yeah. Awesome. Definitely. Oh my God, you guys are so smart. Okay.
It's a lot of trial and error. I wish there was like a magical, okay, A first.
This is what I wanted. I wanted maybe like a chart or some diagrams, something, but it doesn't matter, because if you gave me a chart, I would put it up on my wall and then never look at it again. So you have given me so much good stuff. Like I said, this was all just for me. The rest of you were just
Thank you for joining our working Alex's novel.
With Alex. So the last thing we wanted to talk about, Mia, is right?
I'm sorry, what?
Book recommendations?
Yes, we are. If you didn't know, Amistad Publishing, Amistad Books put together the Blackout the Bestseller list, in which we amplify Black voices and Black writers from June 14th to June 20th. And they are asking people to support your any Black writers that you know, love, illustrators, picture book, middle grade, so that we can really show our dedication and put them on we all know the New York Times bestseller list is kind of like, as they say, editorial, which is just another word for curated, but to really show the power behind we have as a community and put these voices up there. So I wanted to take a moment to recommend some of our favorite writers or books that have come out recently or a couple of years ago, so that maybe y'all can support some wonderful writers. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, I will go first, if that's okay. And I'm going to, at the end of the month, I'm going to, if I finish it, I'm going to have 2 books that I've hand painted that will be painted the edges of that I'll give away for Pride. So this month I'm reading only Black queer creators. And one book that I just started, The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis. It's like this sort of Western fantasy, just queer gorgeousness that I'm very, very excited about. And I don't have my copy here, but I'm really looking forward to reading Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. They are an incredible writer. I don't know how they do what they do. I really don't. I have asked them and they say some things and I'm like, no, but really. Because they write beautifully in middle grade, in YA, in adult, in fantasy, in contemporary. It's like insane. So those are the 2 books that if you want to get them on the bestseller list, I'd be psyched. So that's Felix Ever After. Sorry, I don't have the book with me. Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar, and The Good Luck Girls by Charlotte Nicole Davis.
Okay, and 2 that I have now, and I will be ordering more books, but this one, The Forgotten Girl,
I know that. I haven't read it yet.
India Hill Brown. And I mean, look at the cover. It's about, it's a ghost story. It's middle grade, and it just sounds so haunting and so fantastic and exactly like what middle graders love. So I started reading this, and it absolutely like hits the mark, and I'm like anxious to get off the computer right now to go through it. So that is one. And then of course, A Song Below Water by I'm all turned around here, by Bethany Morrow. So I'm very much looking forward to reading this one. It sounds stunning. The cover is beautiful, and I can't wait to read it. So
Gorgeous.
We have one more question that I'll put up afterwards, but I have a couple that I love. A middle grade From the Desk of Zoe Washington by Janae Marks, who is wonderful. So that's for your middle grade readers. And then I always bring back Dear Haiti, Love Elaine by our very own Maika and Maritza. All that information is in our lasmusasbooks.com straight, and you can find Las Musas also have a bookshop, which I should have dropped the link here. Just one moment. But yes, I love those two reads. Also, Anything and Everything by Tammy Charles, who writes everything. Like what does Tammy not write is what I want to know.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Picture book, chapter books, YA, middle grade. Just support Tammy in all things. And then, oh gosh, Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. What Lane by Tori Maldonado. There are so many wonderful people that you can support.
Yes.
Now and forever. Y'all should keep this going, keep the energy going. And I am going to, we have just, I think we sort of might have answered this one already, but I'm bringing it up just in case. So it's balancing character arcs, particularly if they're not interacting.
So like your example, Mia, of like the Game of Thrones, when there are character arcs that don't necessarily, like in high fantasy, that they don't necessarily interact. Anchors to remind yourself of what POV you're writing. That's a good question. So anchors would be like Imagery. What else? What other anchors could there be? Jenny,
I always
about that already.
I always think of again, go back to that dance that Lori House Anderson said. Think of where your characters are at any given time in your story, and when do they need to come into that dance and when they don't. But you also need to be thinking of what they're doing when they're not doing that dance, when they're not in the front, immediately in the front of the conversation, because essentially you have to think of what's been happening with them at any given time and when it's time to bring them back so that we can experience that with them.
And I think that when you bring them back, when they come back, it has to be because they're going to do something to help push the story forward, to keep the story going along. It's not just, I haven't heard from this character in a while. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to write from her point of view, but she's just going to be sitting in her bedroom, something. There has to be a reason that they're coming back into the dance and taking center stage.
Make it purposeful.
Yeah, and that thing should be something that helps to keep the story going forward.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You are both just so damn smart. Thank you. Yes, don't make the no.
I also dropped the bookshop link for all of our current books on there if people want to support.
Thank you.
And then Naida says that they love the multiple POV release by Lucas Rocha.
Where do we go? There's so many good examples. Thank you, Aida. I think that's another thing that should be obvious, but let's say it anyway, that if you want to approach writing multiple point of views, read a bunch, get from the library a bunch and see what you think is, read it like a writer, not like a reader, and really see what's working, what's not working, and what pulls you out of the story, and the things that pull you out of the story, the things to avoid, and the things that keep you engaged, the things to emulate. So yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yay, we did it! I'm proud of myself.
I'm sweating. You can't tell.
Like I keep saying this, I'm in my garden shed. It's 1,000 degrees in here. I'm like,
oh no. You took one for the team, Alex.
Yeah, no, your office looks so cute though, Jenny. It looks adorable and comfy. Damn.
Thank you. It's just this way because I cleaned up a little bit, like on the other side.
Not good. Not good. Well,
Okay,
thank
I
you
think we
everyone
can.
for coming, and go buy books, go support Black authors, creators, illustrators, and yeah, thank you. Mil gracias.
Yeah. Write your novels, fail a whole bunch, and then do it better.
And keep going.
Keep going. And then